Hey RV family, keep it tight. My name is J Morse, the RV guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the new Ghost record, entitled Impera. Out now on Loma Vista Records, which is to be expected by now from Ghost. I don't think that they necessarily need much of an introduction, because this Swedish rock and metal band have literally made such a name for themselves that if you were to ask me one of the bands that I think is sort of sitting at the top of both mainstream popularity but also acclaim from metalheads and rock heads, I think it would be Ghost. They have become such a household name, whether it be the Grammy nominations, whether it be the performing in sold-out stadiums, performing alongside gigantic bands such as Metallica, or the fact that they have just constantly had controversy associated with them. Past their musics, in terms of publicity stunts, if you even want to call it that, everything that has been surrounding Ghost has always been sort of this tornado of public appeal and media coverage, whether it be the satanic imagery and the thematical elements that are very like satanic and religious and anti-religious and all of these different sort of swirling things that they put into their music, the allegations that were against Ghost, the enigmatic nature of Papa and aka Tobias Forge now, and the Nameless Ghouls and their identities. Without a doubt, Ghost is probably one of the bands that have had the most intrigue associated with them, and that's not even getting into their sound. Ever since Ghost began, they have had this vintage aesthetic to them that is very reminiscent of not only progressive metal and rock of the 1970s, I'm talking bands like Pink Floyd, but also incorporated classic heavy metal in a way that didn't feel disingenuous or didn't feel fake, in the way they embodied the evil and embraced the witchcraft and the satanistic tendencies. It really made for not only some interesting music, but catapulted them into mainstream success. But it wasn't always like that. When Ghost first started, they sort of stayed in the underbelly of metal, and rock and metal fans that felt like they were sort of a breath of fresh air bringing back this old style and performing it in such a good way. It wasn't really until they released Meliora that they just hit a new stride and hit to a next level. The coverage that they got from the media and the way that they exploded into mainstream popularity, radio play, playing on big shows, playing on these gigantic festival stages and stages in general and stadiums, and getting widespread acclaim and coverage from some of the leading publications and reviewers in the game, it only placed them in such a place where they became that household name that they now are. I had a lot of strong words about their 2018 record Prequelle, and ever since the little EP they dropped a year after that record, if you could even call it that, Ghost has pretty much been very quiet. But I must say that the rollout for this record has been insanely cool. I've loved the ominous demeanor, I've loved the costume changes, the way that the Nameless Ghouls are wearing gas masks, and how that goes into the theme, which I'll go into shortly. Because Ghost records, while they never necessarily dive in head first into it, they always have a thematic direction. The last record that they dropped, Prequelle, dealt in the bubonic plague, and it had a lot of tendencies to have the messaging be about the ramifications and consequences of plagues and famines and the mass hysteria and paranoia and anxiety and panic that just arose in those sort of times. Even if it is loose at times, I don't think Ghost has ever really dived into a full theme so much as they have on this record right here. So what does that entail for Impera? Impera, basically, loosely defined, is about sort of the rise and fall of society and empires. It deals with a lot of messaging of Reichs and totalitarian governments sort of rising up, the rebellions associated with it, living under the boot of these socio-cultural and socio-political rulers and living under that thumb and sort of what comes along with that. And going into the philosophy and ideology of this record, I must say that that is the singular thing that kept me hooked and captivated on this record more than any other Ghost record. Most of the time, the lyrics and the themes come second to the instrumentals, come second to the overall composition of a record and the track listing, but it flipped on its head for me on this record. On Impera, I found myself more intrigued and more invested in the lyrical elements, the messaging, and how they were conveying that than I ever was the instrumental or vocals, because I don't want to say that they're necessarily subpar, but I don't think this is some of Ghost's strongest material to date. Take a track like 20s. This track has some of the greatest lyrics on the entire record, but even though Tobias's vocals try to be commanding, I don't think that it conveys it properly, and the sort of vocal dynamics that he engages with on this record, I don't think will really nail home a point in the way that Ghost would particularly like. Because this record is what I would call a rock opera. If there has ever been a Ghost record that could be compared to that, it would be that. This is like Jesus Christ Superstar level of rock opera. It's an odyssey full of power ballads, powerful elements, and these thumping, rolling war drum-like percussive elements, and these riffs that are very paced, but I think that is one of the primary issues. Pacing is a massive issue across this record. Some of these tracks that reach up in like the 5+ minute mark, like Respite on the Spitalfields or Griftwood or Watcher in the Sky, are very thematically strong, but very theatrical. And anyone that has been a fan of Ghost for a while, or detractors, will know that another major issue Ghost has always had is campiness. And campiness, it unfortunately plays a very big role across this album. Contrast that with a track like Spillways. This track is just 3 minutes and a little bit of change, and overall is a very well-progressed and well-paced track. I think Ghost spent a lot of time really fleshing out this record in a dynamic way, without realizing the fact that underselling some of these choruses and verses do not do it any favors to push home the messaging that they're doing, because at its face value, this is probably Ghost's coolest record in terms of the storyline that they are telling, and a very topical thing. And just sort of to tip the hat one more time to the lyrics, I really enjoy how many layers there are to the lyrics. I'll harken back to a track I just mentioned, 20s. It is put very vaguely. You don't necessarily understand what they're talking about, what decade they're talking about. Is it the 2020s? Is it the 1920s? Is it the 1520s? Is it 2220? And I think that by itself, in and of itself, is a major reason this record succeeds on a thematic level. Because think about what that says about what they're trying to tell. If you can't tell if such a grim and dark messaging is talking about the past, the future, or the present, that is such a powerful way of getting your point across by making it so vague, but making it applicable enough to where the average person can attribute that to what they are living through right now, especially in some of the terrible, terrible times that we're living through. And given the recent developments with like the Ukraine and Russia thing, hearing this record deal so much with the fall of society and the breakdown of war and totalitarian governments, I don't think that it could be a more appropriate time to release a record like this. And another net positive I would say for this record is the production is as crisp and beautiful as ever. Even if some of these tracks are understated and I would have liked to see them flesh out a track more in the pacing department, nothing ever sounds dull, nothing ever sounds desaturated. It stays lively, it stays vivid, but it doesn't just sound homogeneous. As I said before, some of this percussive work are like these war drums that are sounding, and they really sell that really well, and the riffs, like usual, have that sort of hypnagogic psychedelic edge of like 1970s progressive metal and rock, but with this edge of like the power ballad and almost this villainous musical demeanor that I think is a really ambitious and at times overzealous direction to go in, but I do appreciate how they tried to sort of lace together such an important theme with such a kind of epic sounding record. I just think that sometimes, especially when they get a little lengthy in the lengthy department, they fail to sell their messaging with the vocals. I would have liked to see Tobias not try to lay into the camp so much, and I would have liked to see these tracks pace a little bit better, because especially on the longer tracks, I think instrumentally they are very proficient and have such an amazing sound to them and an amazing mix to them, which I think at this point anyone would expect that from Ghost at this point. They still feel like they are taking so long to get to the point of what they're trying to say. It's definitely not their strongest batch of tracks instrumentally, and I think examining this record, that's probably the strangest thing, because the ranking that I'm about to give this record is so much more based around the thematics and how this record comes together than it necessarily is instrumentally. Because I wouldn't necessarily consider this record metallic. It certainly is a metal record, and it certainly is a rock album, but there are other elements here, and they're pulling from so many different influences that the roots of sort of this doom metal and sludge metal and fused power ballad heavy metal sound is kind of semi-unfamiliar territory for Ghost. It still has sort of the stamp of approval of what a Ghost fan would come to expect, but it's off the beaten path enough to really keep me interested, even if a lot of the ideas don't pan out as well as they could have. And I would suggest this record not only to people who want to get into Ghost, but fans of Ghost, or just people that want to hear a very topical metal and rock record, if you could even call it that, because there have been few records this year that have really embodied this messaging. And even if instrumentally I'm not really that big of a fan of this record, and I think in many ways it doesn't hold a candle to Prequelle or Meliora in the instrumental department, the production is good enough to keep it above water and certainly above average, even if Tobias sort of undersells his vocals and the instrumentals have a big pacing problem. There are some good standouts across this record, and overall it's a good sounding record, and it makes up sometimes for its shortcomings, and in the thematics department it definitely is the thing that keeps me coming back to this record, because I think that you can't enjoy this record as a solo thing. I think it has to be a coherent, cohesive listen that happens all at once. Not in the same way that you can go back and listen to Cerise off Meliora, or listen to Danse Macabre, or listen to Rats off of Prequelle. Like, these are songs that function in their own right. I think a lot of these tracks I could not appreciate, especially some of the singles, until the full record was released. And I think that's one important takeaway, is if you're going to go into this record, I highly suggest to listen to it in one go. Because if you do that, you're going to have more of an appreciation for this record, and if you just listen to these tracks solo, I think it would sound a lot worse than it actually is. I think this is a record that anyone should hear just for the lyrics alone, even if it's not their strongest record by any measurement. I'm going to be giving this album a 6.5 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Ghost record, Impera? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss this record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is J Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.